What do you do if you realize that your husband's not the father you expected him to be? Well, I found myself in a very similar situation shortly after my son was born, and today I do want to talk about this tough topic. Now, at the time that I felt this, thought that I was surely the only mom that had this feeling. All around me, I was seeing other couples become parents and seeing their, husbands like really step up into the fatherly role. It's come to find out there's actually quite a few women that have felt this same sentiment. But what I was finding was that a lot of the reactions to women that share these thoughts or feelings, a lot of it was very negative and just resign myself to the fact that I would have to solo parent. My husband really rose to the occasion, and there's some things that I definitely learned throughout my experience and what we walked through that you might actually find helpful in your conversations or in your discussion, or how you might be able to approach this with your own husband, and he can end up being a good dad. And also might give you some perspective for what he is experiencing and going through, walking into a fatherly role as well. Let me just caveat this conversation with saying that this is not the conversation that if you are in a situation where you are concerned for your safety or the safety of your child, this conversation is not for you. In that situation, I completely advocate for you to get you and your child to a safe, stable environment. That is not the context of what we're talking about here today. To give you some background and context of what I am talking about is my husband and I were married for quite a long time prior to becoming parents. We struggled for some time with infertility, which is a topic for another day, but we were very aware of the challenges of parenthood, but we were excited to experience those challenges because we knew all of the good things that were on the other side of parenting as well. Like, it's not just hard. There's also a lot of great things too. Well, come to the point where I am now with a probably like a couple of week old baby, and I'm sitting in my room and I am just like realizing I may face my future with my baby as essentially a solo parent because my husband is just not the dad that I thought he was going to be. So, how did I get from the aspect of we were so looking forward to being parents to I'm going to be a solo parent and I'm going to have to face this reality on my own? And if my mom can do it, who did it with 5 kids, like I saw her experience this on a day-to-day basis, then I for sure can accomplish the same thing with one. How did I approach this conversation with my husband that helped him also become the dad that I'm so incredibly proud of? Also, all of the things that he did to be able to really step into the fatherly role and be an amazing dad. So I know that's kind of quite a bit of conversation to discuss today. So let me first talk about the challenges that arose after my son was born. So first, even before my son was born, you have to realize as you go through your pregnancy, even though you feel bonded with your baby and your husband may be very supportive along the way, they are not experiencing the same bond that you have with your baby because they are not connected to your baby, right? He's very much a third party to what I personally am experiencing. And then after my son was born, we as women go through this very large hormonal change, and all of these challenges are happening with our body. There's so many people that are aware of all of the challenges women face and so much support because people recognize everything that we as moms go through. But the husband and the dad still is very much kind of pushed in the background. All of the focus is still on the mom's role, what she has experienced, what she's going through, helping her support her through postpartum depression and screenings and making sure that she's really thriving and connecting with her baby. But there's not very much support nor advocacy for the fathers that also have to learn how to become dads. And even though there are parenting classes and how to change a diaper and how to prepare a bottle, there's not very much out there that I think really also, helps parents, especially dads, understand like what are the emotional changes that you are going to face once you become a parent. For example, I had a really challenging time with birthing. I ended up with an unplanned C-section. I was really struggling to feed him, and even then there were a lot of challenges associated with that. And then we also had some unexpected health challenges with his health after he was born. And from a man's role, not every man is like this, but they are innately driven to be fixers and protectors. And my husband was immediately thrust into a position where he now not only is trying to protect and care for me, but he's also trying to protect and care for a child that he does not have any bond yet built with. Like, right? We birth our babies and they're essentially strangers. Like, we have an idea in our brain as what they're going to be like, but then they come out and they may not be at anything at all like we were anticipating them to be. The first night we brought my baby home from the hospital, he screamed all night. And if you're interested in that conversation, I will link it up for you after this one. But he is completely outside of his element. There's nothing that he could have done in either of those situations to fix the problem, right? He can't fix my body so that way I could give birth naturally. He couldn't fix my son from the health and medical issues that he was experiencing. He couldn't fix our situation between me and my baby so that way he could nurse well and it would be super easy for me. So he is emotionally supporting me through all of these needs, but he feels completely helpless to be able to fix or correct or really support other than listening. And for some men, that is not the skill that they are very naturally inclined to do. Now, thankfully, from the several years of marriage we had already been through, my husband had a better idea of like how to support me when he can't fix anything. But men are also thrust into this situation where there's all of these variables after a baby is born, that it's not just one thing, right? It's not just one thing he has to focus on, which is just like emotionally supporting. There are all of these other factors involved that can lead to realizing that if he can't fulfill his role that he feels innately within himself, then most men will just withdraw. Even if they don't consciously recognize this, they're just going to withdraw because they recognize like they can't do anything. They are powerless to make anything better. They can't actually physically come in and fix and correct anything to be able to care and protect the people that are the closest to them. So they are faced with their inadequacy in that moment. And every time they may be around you or the baby, they are faced with the reality of, I am inadequate to fulfill this baby's needs. And the fact that once a baby is born, that baby mostly just needs mom, right? I mean, yes, dads can, change a diaper, feed them with a bottle, snuggle and burp them. But most of the time, that baby has only experienced being and hearing a mother while in the womb. So it's very natural for that baby to seek comfort first, receive it quicker from the mom because that's all that baby knows. One of the things that my husband is fully aware of that was a huge factor when it came to our situation is lack of sleep and overstimulation. So, of course, we know that moms are going to have very little sleep during the postpartum stage, and that's a big thing that can end up impacting postpartum depression. But we're actually finding now in new studies, which I think are long overdue, is the fact that actually fathers can experience postnatal depression as well. And I have read different articles where some refer to it as like postnatal depression and other ones say postpartum depression. But let's just recognize the fact that if our husbands can kind of like experience like pregnancy symptoms and cravings and sympathy cravings along with us, then surely they can also experience very similar symptoms of going through this postnatal depression period, even though they're not necessarily experiencing the same things hormonally within their body. They are still experiencing all of the external factors that are impacting us. the lack of sleep, the constant crying, the challenges of like learning how to soothe and care for a baby, right? All of those are still huge impactors that can be really challenging for some men. My husband will very willingly say how much he has a really hard time with lack of sleep. If he doesn't get a certain threshold of sleep every night, he has a lot of challenges processing information throughout the day, which may also impact, his mood and be a factor on how he's able to show up for his family. Now, is that an excuse? No, absolutely not. But I do think that as moms, we also need to recognize, and as wives, we need to recognize the challenges and the realities of what our spouse is facing as well. So that way we can at least understand where they're coming from when we are walking into a conversation where where we're trying to address a concern. Let's also talk about the fact that noise is a huge factor. So, me, I like a quiet, silent, very calm environment. And my husband does a lot better with loud noises. Like, I can feel myself way before he does being like, okay, I need to go to a quiet room or we need to turn the music down. Like, all of this sounds is way overstimulating me. Well, he can very easily get to that threshold when a crying baby is nearby. And I do definitely think that some of this has to do with like that trauma we experienced that first night our baby screamed when we brought him home. But even now, if we experience on a movie, for example, where there is a crying baby and it's loud and it's abrasive, and even if it's like less than 10 seconds, we both will turn to each other. Like we have to stop or pause or mute or fast forward because we both still experience some postpartum like stress from reliving that experience of hearing a baby cry to the point where it's just like, oh, it's grating on the nerves. So, of course, if you are having that experience, which most babies cry, that's the only way that they can communicate. They don't have language yet, right? Duh, they're babies. They cry when they are trying to express a need, and it just happens that that's the way they express every need. So I just want us to also like recognize that that can be a huge factor as well on how your husband is able to show up and be a parent and be a father in this season of time. Another thing we need to be a little bit mindful of too is what was modeled to him as far as like how a father shows up. So if he has had a really bad experience with what was modeled to him in his childhood, how his parents showed up or interacted with each other, then of course it's going to be a little bit more challenging because he doesn't have any healthy models to kind of base his behavior off of. Now, that may not be a factor in your situation, but if it is, then I think that needs to be another point of understanding when you walk into these conversations and the expectation that you have of your husband. Now, again, this is not an excuse. If he had poor modeled behavior, that doesn't mean that he then automatically just gets a pass at being a poor dad. But we need to also recognize that sometimes dads don't know how to show up because they never had their dad show up for them, or they don't know how to support their wives because they never saw that modeled to them when they were growing up. One thing that I tried to do prior to my son being born as like a little surprise for my husband was to arrange a dad initiation. We have, bachelor and bachelorette parties for, spouses before they're married, but why don't we do this for dads? So I figured that I would reach out to a whole bunch of his friends as a surprise and say like, hey, can you guys get together and just go do something super fun for him and just impart any of your dad knowledge or wisdom and help him understand or at least like get an idea of what might be helpful for him going into fatherhood. And sometimes women get this at their baby showers, and thankfully more co-ed baby showers are more common nowadays. But if you are still more so traditional like I am and you're having, an all female baby shower, then he might be missing out on having these experiences where other dads can impart wisdom into him, or even just build some camaraderie and just saying like, hey, you know, that night when your child explodes out of their diaper, or you can't comfort your wife, or, you know, you're just so incredibly sleep deprived. I get it. I've been there, right? Like, our husbands need that just as much as we need that as moms. Now, is this to say that therapy isn't important, or that, you know, you shouldn't seek therapy? No. But I do think that it just emphasizes how important it is to have friends to walk alongside you as you move through parenthood, as you move through life. You need someone else there to like validate your feelings and also help you understand, okay, that's a very narrow perception, or be able to understand someone else's perception on the same experience. And I think that allowing our husbands to have these connections with other men is important not only for them, it is super important for us. That's why I tried to make sure that my husband did feel supported prior to going into parenthood, because there are still several evenings every week where my husband is like, hey, do you mind if I go hang out with my friends? Or I'm gonna, you know, spend some time doing video games with, you know, this buddy over here. And I think that as moms, we need to fully recognize that this is not just them escaping. Well, in some cases, it might be. But I do think that like once a week is reasonable. And if you can provide that to your husband, then you should, because that is something that they need. They need that opportunity to escape. They need to be able to create situations where they have that camaraderie built in with other men, that even if they're not talking about parenthood, about, you know, being a dad, about the challenges they're facing, when they are meeting or connecting, they're building trust in that relationship, that if there is a problem, they're more likely to bring it up and address it because they know this bro, right? They have already have that experience built in from all of this previous time that they have spent together. They just need to have cracked enough beers together so then they feel comfortable having a conversation with someone else that can relate to them. Now, this specific point might be a little touchy, but I do think it's incredibly valid. And that is, if you feel like your husband is not the father that you expected him to be, and you are in that very early stages after having a baby, like I was, I think one thing that we definitely need to be mindful of is the lack of intimacy. After you have your baby, you will not be able to be intimate for at least 6 weeks, and your doctor will most likely need to clear you to be intimate, you know, after that point. That's for several factors. I'm not a medical provider, so I don't even need to tell you why. But if you guys are following the guidelines of your doctor, this point in time for your husband may be very challenging, in addition to all of the other factors we already talked about. So yeah, it may not be unusual for him to act different in this time frame, because all of your time and attention is being focused on your child, and there may be other aspects of your relationship that he's missing out on. So of course, it is not unusual for a man to be withdrawn or to be acting differently if his needs that he has normally been experiencing being met in other areas are not actually being met in that same way. Like, of course, it's going to impact your relationship as well as potentially any relationship that he has with the child, because even though they may not necessarily want it to or intend it to, there could possibly be some resentment that is misplaced if all of your time and attention and affection is going towards your child and none of that is left for your husband after that point. We as women need to recognize that we can be affectionate and intimate with our husbands while still following the doctor's prescribed guidelines. When I was recognizing and kind of going back to like realizing, oh, my husband is not the dad that I thought he would be, that sometimes I think we are tempted to throw all of our time and effort into the relationship we have with our child, when really the best thing that we can do is like throw that a lot more time and effort into our relationship with our husband. Once we have a kid, our sole responsibility as a mom, as a parent, is to make sure that that kid is safe and provided for. Outside of being in a situation where you and your child are, not safe or stable, I think that sometimes we as women often are disappointed with the roles of our husbands. And so we focus our attention on our children, when really, if we want the best thing for our child, it's a lot better to invest that time, focus, and energy into our relationship with our spouse. Because if we provide a safe, loving, stable relationship with our spouse, then that child is only going to benefit from the strong relationship that they have, what they're experiencing because of the role of their parents. Now that we've exhausted a lot of the reasons why your husband may be struggling, let's talk about some more positive aspects and like what you can do as a spouse to be able to support your husband. So I think definitely encouraging any bonding that you can with your baby would be super helpful. One thing that my husband did find helpful was to snuggle and cuddle our son when I wasn't nursing or taking care of him. Now, my husband was very present in the fact that he was very willing to help, but I sometimes just needed to do a better job of communicating what I needed help with. Right? Like sometimes we get this idea in our minds as women that our husband should just know stuff and our husband should just read our brain. Like he should see something and then just like know to act. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't always work that way, and we need to communicate what we need. So there would be times when I would have to tell my husband, "Can you do that? Can you get me this?" Or I need you to do this. And it's not just this blanket statement where it's like, okay, I need you to be more helpful. I need you to help me more often. I need you to be more present. Like it sometimes takes, when they are learning a completely new role, it sometimes takes them telling them in every moment because they just don't know. Like we may recognize a need, but there's not a time frame that they know to do it by. For example, if you ask your husband, "Hey, can you take out the trash?" In your mind, you may be thinking, I need you to take out, like I'm asking you to take out the trash, so I'm expecting you to take it out now. And in his mind, he's just thinking like, oh yeah, she wants me to take out the trash, but she's not giving me a time frame, so I can do it whenever I want, whenever I get to it. Like there's no urgency. We sometimes need to communicate to our husbands the urgency and the time frame we need them to take action. Can you go change our baby's diaper right now? Can you go get me a snack in the next 5 minutes? And setting that time frame for them sometimes helps them realize this is just not an activity that I need to do whenever I can get to it. This is an activity that I need to do right now. And I know that you might be thinking like, well, duh. But sometimes, again, in our postpartum brain, in our lack of sleep brain, in our overstimulated, our baby is crying, I haven't showered in 3 days, like I need food brain, we forget to communicate these very subtle pieces of what we need when we're talking and communicating, that like our husband is also going on lack of sleep, overstimulation, right? That we cannot be more clear. Being more clear is only going to make things better. So why not take it to another level of communicating what our needs and desires and wants are, so that way there's no misunderstanding by what you're asking and how you're asking him to show up. When you see him doing something that you think is really helpful or really important, say it. Say, I really love seeing you snuggle our baby, or I love it when you hold my hand and we're all snuggling together on the couch, or I love it when you tell our son that you you love him. Validate the moments that you see him stepping up and being a dad. That way he knows to do more of that. Men love it when they are recognized. I mean, who doesn't love it when they're recognized? But if you are validating the experience and the behavior that you want him to do, he's most likely going to continue doing that behavior. The season of life where he is constantly questioning, okay, I don't feel adequate. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't care for or protect my family. But if you're coming alongside of him and you're validating the good things that he is doing, then that is going to give him more confidence and more security in knowing that he can provide, he can protect, he can care for you and his new child, right? Sometimes I think that we as women, we are so quick to criticize our husbands as a general majority that we don't take enough time to also validate the incredible things that they do. So yeah, there are still times when my husband will do a task that I completely expect him to do. It's completely it's a responsible aspect of being a parent, being an adult, like showing up to work. Normal everyday tasks, right? Things that you're just like, well, of course you should do that because that needs to be done. But sometimes it's still really nice to hear like, hey, thanks for doing that. Thanks for working hard. Thanks for taking care of our kids. Thanks for making dinner or doing the dishes. It helps our spouses feel appreciated. And when our husbands feel appreciated, they're more likely to help more because we're validating the actions and the effort that they're already making. Like, would we not, as moms, love it if our husbands came to us every single night and said, hey, thank you for being such an amazing mom. Thank you for all of the work that you do. You work so hard. What else can I do for you? Because you are so exhausted and you're such a hard worker and you're such a good mom. Like, would that not warm your heart? Because if that warms our heart, then why should we not do that for our husbands? So I do hope that through this conversation, it has given you some actual practical steps of how you could kind of frame the conversation with your husband to help, depending on your situation, if you feel like, or if your husband feels like he would benefit from having therapy. A really good place to start is obviously with your medical insurance. But if your medical insurance does not provide that additional if it's not covered as part of your medical plan, another good place to look is with your employer's benefits. Some employers offer certain amounts of free counseling or counseling for certain subjects. So that way you can meet with a medical professional that has experience in these topics. But I would advocate that you do need a good group of people around you as a good close circle of friends to walk with you through life, because life is never meant to be done alone. I would really love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Can you relate? And if you can, I would love for you to drop some encouragement to another mom that might have or be experiencing anything similar. But just know that your husband can change. He can end up, rising to the occasion and being a really good dad. I do have to say that I think that my husband is an excellent father. It makes me so proud seeing him interact with our kids. And he will be the first to say that first 2-month period of becoming a dad were really tough on him. He will often give the advice now to other new parents. For the first 2 months, it's like they're just like a little alien blob that you have no connection with, or at least he had no connection with, and that he ended up becoming really excited to be a dad around the 2 to 3 month mark, because that's when they're more so interactive. Like, they're smiling, they're getting something back from babies at that point. And I could definitely tell that more so just kind of being around him. If you're interested in that episode that I mentioned earlier, I will link that one up for you next. But I do hope that we'll hang out again soon.